The Sunday school lesson for September the 1st, 2024 is Daniel honors God's law. Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. I am Audrey. If you are new here, please know that this is an audio reading of the lesson. Convictions test. Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. Personal resolve. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. One of the emphasis in this book is the kingship of God over individuals and nations. Kenneth Gainwell summarizes Daniel wastes no time getting to his theme, the sovereignty of God. The captivity of 605 BC was not a victory for Nebuchadnezzar any more than the crucifixion was a victory for Satan. The God of creation decided that year that a new chapter would open in his personal world book. So he sent Jehoiakim to defeat and Daniel to Babylon. Daniel showed no concern over the secular education or being given a Babylonian name, for he knew who he was and how God saw him. The prescribed diet, however, posed a problem. It violated God's law. It is probable that Daniel's objection to the Babylonian food and drink was that it had been dedicated to false gods. To eat and drink this would be a violation of the personal convictions he drew from God's law. He requested, therefore, to be excused from that prescribed diet. Personal integrity. Daniel chapter 1, verses 9 through 10. In these verses, we see not only Daniel's integrity, but also that of the chief of the eunuchs, or officers, over Daniel and his friends. Ashpenaz had observed that Daniel was not naturally a troublemaker, so he had developed kind feelings toward him. Even this was the sovereign working of God in his heart. God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 9. His rejection of Daniel's request, therefore, was not based on personal negative feelings. Ashpenaz revealed in his response to Daniel a loyalty to the king. There was certainly fear involved, but he did not express any bad feelings toward Nebuchadnezzar. After all, as a servant of the king, he could not make such decisions on his own, especially if they would be contrary to what the king had ordered. Ashpenaz had a responsibility toward Daniel. He did not dare change the king's rules. Ashpenaz argued that if Daniel and his friends did not eat the king's food and, as a result, did not look healthy, he would be held responsible. This could result in his death. Therefore, Daniel's request was bad for all of them. Convictions maintained. Daniel chapter 1, verses 11 through 16. Special request. Daniel chapter 1, verses 11 through 13. Daniel could not submit because he knew that would violate his spiritual convictions. So he devised a creative alternative and presented it to the steward who had been appointed over him by Ashpenaz. Daniel proposed a 10-day test in which he and his friends would be put on a vegetable and water diet. The word translated pulse in verse 12 refers to things that are sown, so it is possible that grains were included in Daniel's proposal. It was the meat and wine, apparently sacrificed to pagan gods, that presented the real problem. Daniel left it up to the steward to make the final decision after the test diet was completed. He proposed that the steward examine them carefully to see how healthy they looked. If they were not up to par, the steward could determine the next action. Daniel was confident in his protective God, but we know from the rest of the book that, if necessary, he and his friends would suffer the consequences for obeying God rather than man. The entire experiment probably was approved by Ashpenaz, since he was the one who had appointed this steward to his position. Special results. Daniel chapter 1, verses 14 through 15. This time, Daniel's request was granted, perhaps because the steward saw a way out of his potential dilemma. A time frame had been established, so he could always order them to return to the royal diet if he needed to. There was still plenty of time to get the young men in shape if the experiment failed. For the next 10 days, Daniel and his friends were served what Daniel had requested, after which they stood before the steward to hear his decision about the matter. The result was that Daniel and his friends appeared healthier than all who were given the diet ordered by the king. Special treatment. Daniel chapter 1, verse 16. As soon as the steward saw the results in the young men, he permanently withheld the king's diet and continued giving them the vegetables and water they had requested. It is obvious to us that God oversaw the entire process and allowed these men special treatment not afforded anybody else. The change of diet was just the beginning. God did much more for them since they had boldly taken a stand for Him. God gave all four of them an unusually high degree of knowledge and skill in learning. Convictions rewarded. Daniel chapter 1, verses 17 through 21. Facing Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel chapter 1, verses 17 through 19. God not only blessed the young men physically, he also gave them wisdom. Wisdom involves an ability to see life and its events as God sees them. Since Nebuchadnezzar was preparing them for responsible positions in his administration, this was a very important gift for each of them. God gave Daniel one additional gift: the ability to understand visions and dreams. This sets the stage for much of what comes later in the book. He had an ability that led him to stand before kings and proclaim major movements in history and among nations. Have you ever stopped to consider how educated Nebuchadnezzar must have been? Only someone with education and intelligence could personally interview young men like this and recognize them to be far superior in intelligence and understanding to all the others he interviewed. It was the chief of the eunuchs himself, probably still Ashpenaz, who took them to Nebuchadnezzar. He had been the one in charge of the entire program, even though he had steward working under his authority with these particular men. The results were conclusive. Among all those many captives in training, none compared with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were the ones who entered the king's service. It will become clear in the rest of the book that their secular education did not damage their spiritual standards. Impressing Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel chapter 1, verses 20 through 21. No matter what subject Nebuchadnezzar explored with the young men, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were all in his realm. Verse 20. This phrase is an idiom referring to superior intelligence and understanding. While the men were naturally intelligent, we see clearly from the text that God enhanced that intelligence with extraordinary measures of understanding. Daniel and his friends began working immediately in the administration of the empire. The great irony in Daniel 1 is that despite Daniel's resolve not to eat the king's food, God sustained him so that on his meager diet, he ended up surviving longer than the entire Babylonian kingdom. Verse 21. In the remaining chapters of the book of Daniel, there is much more emphasis on Daniel than on his three friends, though they do not disappear from the pages of Daniel entirely. Daniel was just beginning a long time of royal service under several Babylonian kings, up to the time that Babylon was conquered by the Persians. The faith of these men was not pretentious, but real and sincere. They had a confidence in God that enabled them to stand for Him in the face of all tests. Thank you so very much for listening. And please know that every Sunday at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, I release a new audio for the upcoming Sunday School lesson. Stay safe and may God bless.